Madam President, while the Republicans failed to join us in an effort to avert the doubling of the interest rate on need-based student loans, there is still time to act and to make things right for students. On July 1st, the interest rate on subsidized stafford loans doubled from 3.4% to 6.8%. Instead of allowing us to take up a vote on an extension of the lower rate, the other side continues to push a so-called long-term solution that would saddle students with even more debt in the near future. And students and advocates from across the country have been very clear. On June 21st, they wrote to Senate leadership. In their words, "A bad deal that is permanent for student borrowers is worse than no deal at all." We need time to work together to develop a good deal for students, one that is comprehensive, one that touches not upon just rates, but on incentives to lower costs for college education, on ways in which students can refinance their existing debt and their future debts. Because as we all understand, we have reached a point where student debt has exceeded credit card debt. It's the second largest household debt, $1 trillion in the economy. And it is saddling a generation and future generations with burdens that they well might not be able to discharge. In the meantime, at this moment, we should take up and pass the Keep Student Loans Affordable Act, which I have offered along with Senator Hagan and 39 of my colleagues to ensure that students with the greatest financial need do not see the interest rate on their loans doubled. Again, at the heart of our student lending program has been a special concern to allow young men and women with talent from low and moderate incomes to go to college. That is why we created the subsidized stafford loan program. And that is what we have to keep a focus and emphasis on today. 49 organizations representing students, educators, colleges and universities, and workers from across the country have asked us to do this. These are the students. These are the universities. These are the people who have most at stake, and they're telling us again, a bad deal is worse than no deal at all. We should take a step back and remember why we offered student loans in the first place. When President Lyndon Johnson signed the Higher Education Act into law in 1965, he said, "And it is a truism, education is no longer a luxury. Education in this day and age is a necessity." And his words are truer today than they were in 1965. According to Georgetown University's Center on Education and Workforce, we will fall 5 million jobs short of the workers with post-secondary credentials we will need by 2020. We already know there's going to be a gap right now between the workers we need with advanced degrees and the jobs available by 2020. And so for saddling this generation with additional costs and thereby inhibiting those that may well have the talent but not the resources to go to college, we're going to create even a bigger divergence between the demand for jobs and the talented Americans that can fill those jobs. Nearly 2/3 of new jobs will require a college degree or similar credential. President Johnson, again, referred to the Higher Education Act as a promise that the nation was making to its young people for generations to come. The promise was that this nation was not going to allow financial barriers to keep willing and able young people from a college education. But today, that promise is at risk. As I've indicated, the job market increasingly demands post-secondary education simply to achieve middle-class earnings. At the same time, college is getting more and more expensive. As I said, also, student loan debt is accelerating. It's second only to mortgage debt for American households. And this is going to have a huge impact on the overall economy of this country. It's not going to be just individual students and families struggling. The Federal Reserve of New York and others have reported that this debt is dragging down our economy and the young families as they try to establish themselves in an economy. The primary tool in the Higher Education Act to help students pay for colleges are grants, work-study, and low-cost loans. The Pell Grant, and I must say we're so proud in Rhode Island because it was authored and championed by our great Senator Claiborne Pell. But that grant is less and less able to fund a college education. In the 1960s, it was a large part of the whole tuition fee and the whole expenses fees for a year in college. Today, it's shrinking, even as we try to extend it. And so more and more students have had to rely upon loans. And that is why we're seeing this huge explosion in debt. But today, instead of aiding students with low-cost loans, the federal government, ironically, is reaping profits from these students. We have to change this. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that between now and 2023, student loans will generate $184 billion in revenue for the federal government. At a time when students are struggling, when they're seeing their debts explode, we're making money off them, not investing in them, but putting them under a huge financial burden. So as we sort out these complex problems, I think the most sensible and wisest thing to do is keep this subsidized loan rate at 3.4%. Use the year to engage and successfully complete the complex task of looking at several different aspects of this problem. However, we are blocked from doing so because budget rules basically require us to replace the revenue. Now, we're able to do that in this proposal that we have made by closing a tax loophole, but we have to be able to look carefully not only at what we will do to make it easier and more effective for students, but also how we will pay for it. Now, we have to also recognize that for many years, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have really targeted some of these subsidized loans, wanting to make them more expensive. From the contract with America in the 1990s to the Ryan budget, they have suggested things, for example, of eliminating the in-school interest subsidy on student loans. For subsidized student loans, we pay the interest while the student is in the college and pursuing their educational goals. And they've suggested we eliminate that. These are some of the reasons why I think we have to be skeptical of proposals that are being advanced in order to provide relief for students. The so-called Bipartisan Student Loan Certainty Act would add nearly $1 billion in additional revenues from student loans to the government's coffers. It may be a short-term fix, but it creates a much larger long-term problem. The teaser rates in the first few years mask the uncapped rates students would face in the decades to follow. And let me suggest this chart is very revealing. This is the undergrad Stafford loan. This green line is the graduate Stafford loan, and this is the PLUS loan for parents. And as you can see, they accelerate dramatically because of the 10-year Treasury bill rate that's been chosen by supporters of the other proposal, and because of the likely increase in that rate. And it reaches the point, and here, interest rate exceeds current law in 2016. So by 2016, these loans will be much more expensive. This is a classic case of, enjoy 2 or 3 years of low interest and be prepared to pay a lot for it in the future. It is eerily reminiscent of those proposals to refinance your house with an adjustable rate uncapped mortgage and get rid of that old-fashioned fixed rate, which was so prevalent in the first decade of the 2000s and which caused so much havoc and still is causing so much havoc. CBO estimates that if you look from 2017 to 2023 alone, students will pay $37.8 billion more under the proposal of the so-called Bipartisan Financial Relief Act. Now, students are smart. They can figure it out, but there's something else that we have to, I think, add to the mix. This is an estimate of the rates that was made a few weeks ago in that chart. Here is the change in the daily yield for the 10-year T-note. This is the benchmark rate. You can see where it was beginning May 1st of 2013. It has gone from about 1.6% all the way up to about 2.6%. This rate is rising dramatically. Why? Well, for one reason, the Federal Reserve has indicated that they're going to begin to taper off their quantitative easing program. For one reason, as we see signs of growth in the economy, interest rates will rise naturally. And so what we could find out is that this chart actually underestimates the potential growth in interest rates, and students could end up paying much more. And in the Republican proposal, there is no cap on these rates. Now, they talk about the fact there's a consolidation process, but that consolidation process can only be entered into after you've gone through school, begin repayment, accumulated interest at increasing rates each year, and then indeed, when you go into the consolidation phase, all of those interest payments are capitalized, and the loan is stretched out over many years, meaning that you end up paying more. And so it is not a rate at all, a rate cap, rather. And frankly, without a rate cap, I think we're exposing students and their families to vast uncertainty. In fact, the only thing that seems to be certain is that these rates are going up. Now, we do have to approach this problem in a thoughtful way, and that's why I introduced the Responsible Student Loan Solutions Act with Senator Durbin. It's a long-term proposal. It would base student loan interest rates on the actual cost of running the student loan programs, not on a certain Treasury bill rate, but the actual cost of the government, and it will protect students by capping interest rates on each of the individual loan programs. Our proposal would, in effect, pass on the savings that the federal government accrues by the low cost of borrowing relative to other borrowers, their ability to absorb risk relative to others, and the economies of scale for loan servicing for students across this country. And additionally, by increasing in this legislation the loan limits on our subsidized loans, we will allow students of low and moderate income to receive more help and not require them to go and borrow unsubsidized loans at higher interest rates, and as a result, I think, help bring down this whole cascading issue of student debt. And finally, our legislation would provide relief to students with outstanding loans, that's upwards of $1 trillion, by allowing them to refinance to a lower interest rate. And these are some of the key elements for a true long-term solution. And we also need to address the cost of college. It's going up astronomically. The institutions have to have a lot more at stake. They have to be very careful that they are not only selecting well-qualified students, but they're preparing them for the workforce of this century, and that they can have certainty, and the student can have certainty, that the skills that they master in college will be rewarded with a job in our economy. And finally, we've got to establish a true federal-state partnership. Federal grants and loans can't keep pace with these rising costs. We have to work with every level of government to try to address these issues. What I would suggest is that we work together. First, we extend the 3.4% interest rate. Then, consciously, deliberately, and expeditiously, I hope, move forward to fix these issues, these complex issues, protect our students, allow education to be once again the engine that pulls the country ahead, and allow every American, regardless of their wealth, to get aboard that train and go forward.